The war had stretched across the stars for over a century, an unrelenting conflict that had reshaped entire sectors, rewritten the balance of power, and turned once thriving civilizations into little more than footnotes in history. The Zalari, Dominion, a war-driven empire built on absolute conquest, had long since perfected the art of dismantling its enemies. With fleets that eclipsed the light of suns and strategies honed by generations of ruthless warfare, they were a force that no species had been able to stop. What had begun as border skirmishes had escalated into a full-scale galactic campaign, swallowing world after world in an unstoppable tide of destruction. The Zalari did not negotiate. They did not compromise. They did not leave survivors unless those survivors could serve a purpose. And now, at the very edge of civilized space, the last remnants of the Valnari Confederation prepared to make their final stand over Terrellian Prime, their last major stronghold. The Valnari had once been a power to rival the Dominion, a proud and advanced people with a navy that had once ruled the trade lanes. But the war had drained them. Their fleet, once a mighty and disciplined force, had been reduced to a desperate, ragged collection of battered warships, outdated cruisers, and barely functional carriers. Their weapons were old, their shields flickered with instability, and their crews, once among the best trained in the galaxy, were exhausted beyond reason. And yet, they stood, because there was no other choice. On the bridge of the VNS Stormwalker, the last surviving command ship of the Valnari fleet, Commander Ralveth gazed at the massive tactical display that loomed over him. The main holoscreen was filled with red markers, Zalari warships, hundreds of them, arranged in flawless battle formations just beyond the gravitational pull of Terrellian Prime. They moved with the precision of a predator closing in for the kill, each ship a masterpiece of military engineering, built for speed, firepower, and absolute efficiency. Ralveth knew the truth. This would not be a battle. It would be an execution. Beside him, Captain Selran, his second-in-command, watched in silence, her usually sharp and defiant eyes dulled by exhaustion. The weight of inevitable defeat hung over the entire bridge crew like a suffocating fog. They had fought for years, retreated from countless worlds, lost millions, only to end up here, at the edge of extinction. Still, Ralveth had sent out a final distress signal, not because he expected salvation, but because hope, no matter how foolish, was a difficult thing to kill. The message had been broadcast into the void, a desperate plea to any who might be listening. But the Valnari had no allies left. Those who might have once come to their aid had long since fallen or abandoned them, unwilling to risk the wrath of the Dominion. The silence in response to their call had been deafening, and now the time had come. The Zalari Grand Marshal Varric, a being of cold logic and ruthless precision, transmitted his final demand. His holographic image, a towering figure clad in the ornate warplate of the Dominion, flickered to life on the Stormwalker's bridge. His deep, mechanical voice carried no malice, no anger, only the simple, unwavering certainty of an executioner carrying out a sentence. Valnari fleet, your resistance is at an end. Surrender your vessels. Lay down your weapons. There will be no negotiations. There will be no mercy for continued defiance. Ralveth inhaled slowly, then turned his gaze toward Selran. Her voice was quiet, but steady. Orders, Commander. He already knew how this would end. They all did. His fingers hovered over the control panel before pressing the final command. All ships, prepare to engage. If we fall, let it be as warriors. The order rippled through the fleet. Engines roared to life, weapon systems powered up. The formations tightened, even as the officers and crew braced themselves for the inevitable. They were outnumbered 5-1 with no hope of victory. But they would fight. The Zalari began their advance. Then, without warning, space itself seemed to ripple. A flash of light, an unnatural distortion at the far edge of the system. The entire battlefield fell into a stunned silence as something appeared. A single ship, dropping out of faster-than-light travel with a smoothness that defied conventional physics. At first, neither the Valnari nor the Zalari could process what they were seeing. It was no known Valnari vessel. It was not Zalari. It was something else entirely. It was large, but not massive. not the size of a dreadnought, nor a conventional battleship. Yet something about it felt wrong. The dark, angular hull, the way it barely reflected the distant light of Tyrellion's sun, the eerie hum of energy that pulsed from its surface like a predator waiting in silence. The Valnari scrambled to identify it. No records matched. The Zilari ran deep scans. The readings were wrong. The ship's power signature fluctuated in ways that didn't conform to any known energy source. Its mass was denser than it should be, its structure riddled with unfamiliar alloys and unrecognizable technology. Then, without warning, the ship transmitted a simple identifier across all channels: HSS Vengeance. A ripple of confusion spread through the Valnari ranks. Human. The realization settled in like a slow-burning fire. Humans. A species that had, for the most part, stayed isolated in their own corner of the galaxy. A people considered small, unimportant, a minor race without an empire. And yet, here, in the midst of the most devastating war the galaxy had seen in centuries, a single human warship had arrived. Alone. It did not move to retreat. It did not broadcast surrender. It simply drifted forward, its hull silent, its presence like an unanswered question hanging over the battlefield. The Zilari hesitated. For the first time in his long and ruthless career, Grand Marshal Varric did not immediately issue an order. He simply watched, calculating, analyzing. Then, before anyone could react, the Vengeance powered up its weapons, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The battlefield was frozen in a moment of surreal stillness. The arrival of the human warship had disrupted the script of inevitability, injecting an unknown variable into what had once been a predetermined slaughter. For the first time in the long and merciless history of Zilari conquest, there was hesitation, uncertainty, and beneath it, the faintest ember of something the Zilari had never allowed themselves to feel: doubt. On the bridge of the Stormwalker, Commander Ralveth watched the unidentified vessel with an expression torn between bewilderment and disbelief. A human warship, a single human warship, standing alone against the vast and merciless armada of the Dominion. It was madness. Yet, it was there, real, tangible, and it was moving. The Vengeance advanced with an eerie, deliberate slowness, its dark hull gleaming under the distant light of Tyrellion's sun. Its engines burned cold, almost unnatural in their smoothness. No erratic thruster readjustments, no wasted energy. It moved like a predator that had long since perfected the art of the hunt. There was no bravado, no posturing, just purpose. Ralveth's hands curled into fists as he forced himself to think, to analyze. Every civilization in the galaxy had records of humanity, but they were trivial. Humans had never been a galactic power. They had no sprawling empire, no grand fleets that could rival the Dominion or the Confederation. Their home system was isolated, their influence minimal, and yet here they were. His second-in-command, Selran, spoke in a hushed voice, her fingers dancing over the sensor console. "It's absorbing our scans. They're bouncing back incomplete. It's like trying to read through shifting mist." Ralveth's pulse quickened. That wasn't normal. Across the battlefield, the Zilari fleet adjusted formations, realigning their weapons, shifting their approach. They did not fear the unknown, but they recognized it. Grand Marshal Varric, ever the tactician, was not a creature of impulse. He had won countless campaigns through cold, methodical precision. If the Vengeance had been any other unknown vessel, he would have destroyed it immediately, dissected the wreckage, and moved on without a second thought. But something about this ship felt different. A silence hung across the Dominion's command frequencies. Their scans were returning anomalies. The ship's hull did not behave as expected. It absorbed directed sensor sweeps, reflecting back incomplete readings, as if its composition shifted on a microscopic level. It had mass, but too much of it. It had an energy signature, but it fluctuated as though refusing to be categorized. And then, in a single instant, the ship spoke. Not in words, not in demands, but in action. The Vengeance flickered, one moment a drifting specter, the next, a streak of motion. It crossed the battlefield in an impossible instant, breaking the fundamental rules of known physics. There was no acceleration, curve, no inertia lag. One moment it was in the void, the next, a HFY war cruiser, a vessel bristling with plasma cannons and shield arrays strong enough to withstand planetary bombardments, was simply gone. No explosion, no cascading fireball. Just erasure. One moment there, the next. Missing. A ripple of unease swept through the HFY ranks. Their formations wavered. Entire minds struggled to comprehend what had just happened. There had been no warning shot, no conventional engagement, just the absolute removal of a warship from existence. Then, reality caught up. The human warship was behind them now, and it was still moving. HFY gunships fired on instinct. Beams of high-energy plasma lashed out in rapid succession, converging on the human vessel from every angle. These were weapons designed to carve through battle cruisers, to reduce enemy fleets to floating debris. The Vengeance did not dodge, it did not activate shields, it did not engage countermeasures. The plasma blasts hit, but they did not burn. They bent. The moment they should have made impact, they curved, their trajectories warping like light bending around a black hole. The energy dissipated harmlessly, into the void, dragged into some unseen gravitational distortion around the ship. On the bridge of the Dominion's command dreadnought, Grand Marshal Varric watched in silence, his mind running 1,000 calculations. This was not technology. Not conventional technology, at least. The ship operated on principles he could not define. That was unacceptable. He leaned forward, his voice cutting through the command channels with the weight of finality. Converge all forces. Deploy the dreadnought artillery. No more hesitation. Obliterate it. The HFY fleet reacted with precision. Hundreds of warships shifted into a kill formation, massive battleships realigning their forward batteries. Dreadnought-class rail accelerators powered up, their enormous magnetic coils humming with the charge of planet-cracking payloads. The human ship did not react, it did not acknowledge, it simply continued forward. Then, a distortion, deeper than the first. Space itself seemed to shudder as an invisible pressure wave expanded outward from the Vengeance. The nearest HFY vessels, light destroyers poised to fire their opening barrage, were the first to be caught. They froze in place, not by weapons fire, not by shields, by something far more fundamental. Ralveth watched in shock as the destroyers twisted in on themselves, their hulls compressing as if caught in the hands of an unseen titan. They crumpled without a sound. No flames, no explosions, just the cold, merciless grip of forces beyond conventional understanding. The HFY fleet, trained for absolute obedience, hesitated. That should not have been possible. Varric's mind raced, through strategies, countermeasures, fail-safes. Every instinct, every logical pathway, told him that this was not a battle that could be won conventionally. This was something else, a force beyond their calculations. And then, for the first time, in his long career, Grand Marshal Varric felt it, fear. The human warship did not slow, it did not falter. It was still coming. Panic was not an emotion the HFY Dominion allowed to exist within its ranks. Their soldiers were trained from birth to obey without question, to execute orders with absolute precision. Fear was a disease, eradicated through relentless conditioning. And yet, in that moment, as the Vengeance carved through their fleet like a phantom of the void, the impossible had become reality. Fear had returned to the HFY. Grand Marshal Varric refused to accept. It, his mind, sharpened through centuries of warfare, sought patterns, weaknesses, explanations. There had to be an answer. No vessel could be this untouchable. No technology could so completely defy the laws of engagement. Even the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy had limits. This warship, this human warship, should have been no different. And yet it moved through the heart of his fleet like a predator among prey, untouchable, unchallenged, an enigma wrapped in the cold silence of the void. Orders snapped through the Dominion's command network. Every available dreadnought redirected their firepower, unleashing a cascade of energy capable of reducing planets to rubble. Hypersonic kinetic slugs, each the size of a small building, screamed through the void at a fraction of light speed, their sheer mass capable of punching through star fortresses. Torpedoes laced with antimatter detonated in blinding eruptions of unfiltered annihilation. It was overkill. It was necessary. The first wave of projectiles reached their target, and then, just as before, the impossible happened. They vanished. No impacts. No detonations. The moment the weapons should have collided with the Vengeance, they simply ceased to be. Sensors registered nothing. No explosion, no energy dispersal. As if the very fabric of space had folded them out of existence. Varroc's mind locked onto the only explanation: space-time manipulation. This was not simply armor plating of unknown material. This was not a shield system operating on exotic energy fields. The Vengeance was rewriting physics itself. It was editing reality. Selron, voice tight with disbelief, whispered across the bridge. "Marshal, I don't think it's dodging our attacks. I don't think it needs to." Varroc's throat tightened. He had fought ancient warlords, crushed rebellion fleets, led campaigns against superpowers that had ruled for millennia. Never, not once, had he encountered something he could not understand. Until now. Ralveth, his most trusted tactician, struggled to form words. "We have no countermeasures. No tactical model accounts for this." The crew aboard the Dominion's command dreadnought had spent years, decades, believing in their own supremacy. The Dominion was absolute. No fleet, no species, no empire had ever stood against them and lived to tell the tale. They were the storm, the executioners of order, the architects of control. And yet, the Vengeance continued forward, untouched. The Zalari forces were beginning to fracture. Battleships that had once held rigid formation were drifting apart, hesitation creeping into the movements of their captains. Smaller vessels, corvettes and gunships, had already begun to retreat, their pilots realizing the futility of resistance. A break in discipline, a failure of the unshakable will that had once defined them. And then, the human ship spoke. A signal, not through standard communication channels, but through something deeper. It resonated through the very fabric of space, a pulse of something that could not be ignored. Not sound, not language, an idea. A message that burned itself into the minds of every Zalari aboard every vessel. It was not words, not a threat, not a demand. It was knowledge, a glimpse into something greater. Varroc felt it like a whisper in the core of his being, a cold realization that lodged itself deep within his mind. The Zalari Dominion had always assumed the galaxy belonged to them, that they were the apex, the final authority in the cosmos. But now, standing before the Vengeance, he understood the truth. Humanity had never been absent from galactic affairs because they were weak. They had been absent because they had chosen to be, and now, for the first time in known history, a human warship had entered the battlefield. Varroc had no doubt that the galaxy would never recover. Silence had become the loudest sound in the Zalari fleet. Not the silence of a comms blackout, not the eerie calm before a battle resumed, but something deeper, heavier, an oppressive weight that seeped into the bones of every soldier, every officer, every commander. The kind of silence that came with understanding that everything you believed in, everything you had built your existence upon, had just been shattered beyond repair. Grand Marshal Varroc had always believed in control. The Dominion's power was absolute because it was built upon the foundation of unbreakable discipline, superior strategy, and overwhelming firepower. But now, he stood upon the bridge of his dreadnought, staring at the screens, watching his forces falter, and knew that control was slipping away like grains of sand through his fingers. The human warship had not fired a single shot. It had not needed to. Its presence alone was unraveling the Dominion's cohesion. Captains who had never hesitated before now wavered, their formations breaking apart as uncertainty spread like a virus. Fear had been a theoretical concept to the Zalari, a weakness that had been eradicated from their kind long ago. And yet, as they watched the Vengeance drift through their ranks, untouched by their mightiest weapons, unbound by the laws of warfare they understood, fear returned to them. It coiled around their thoughts, poisoning their certainty, infecting their commands with hesitation. It was in the way their pilots took just a fraction of a second longer to follow orders. the way their gunners' hands trembled over their controls, the way even Varric himself found his breath shallow, his pulse just a bit too fast. This was not a simple defeat. This was the destruction of an idea, the illusion of invincibility that had shielded the Dominion for centuries. But Varric was not a man who surrendered to fate. His mind, though shaken, remained razor-sharp. If conventional strategy had failed, then he would abandon it. If firepower was meaningless, he would discard it. The Dominion had not survived for millennia without adaptation. And if there was one truth he still clung to, it was this. Everything had a weakness. The Vengeance was powerful beyond measure, but it was not a god. It was still a ship. It still had a crew. And if it had a crew, it had limits. Varric's hands moved in swift, precise motions across the command console. He pulled up every scrap of data the fleet had managed to collect on the human vessel, cross-referencing energy fluctuations, sensor distortions, and movement patterns. If weapons could not touch it, if conventional technology could not track it, then he needed something unconventional, something raw, something brutal. "Prepare the suppression field," Varric ordered, his voice steady, his mind locking onto a new strategy. Selran turned sharply, her pale eyes widening in shock. "Marshal, that device, it's untested. The gravitational backlash alone could—" "I am well aware," Varric cut her off. "But we are not facing an opponent that follows the rules of engagement. We must break free of our own rules if we are to survive." His voice carried no doubt. But deep within him, uncertainty coiled like a living thing. The suppression field was not a weapon in the traditional sense. It was a crude, dangerous experiment. A desperate project born from the Dominion's paranoia over theoretical threats. The device did not destroy its target. It did not fire energy beams or disrupt shields. Instead, it created an event horizon fluctuation, a localized rupture in the gravitational constants of space itself. In theory, it would create an area where conventional physics collapsed into chaos, where even something as seemingly invulnerable as the Vengeance might struggle to remain untouchable. The order was given. Across the Dominion fleet, the command was relayed to a handful of specialized warships carrying the experimental devices. They moved into position, their hulls vibrating, with the strain of powering up the field. The energy signatures were erratic, unstable, like a star on the verge of collapse. If it worked, it could force the human ship into a moment of vulnerability. If it failed, it could tear apart everything in the vicinity, including the Dominion's own fleet. Varric knew the risk. He embraced it. The moment the suppression field activated, the fabric of space groaned. It was not a sound, not in the traditional sense, but every Zalari aboard every ship felt it. A deep, resonating pressure in their skulls, a sense that reality itself had been bent. The stars shifted, just slightly, their positions altering by impossible degrees. The vast emptiness of space took on a liquid-like distortion, as if the universe itself had been placed under an immense weight, and the Vengeance, for the first time, reacted. It halted. It was not a simple stop. It was a moment of raw tension, of something unseen struggling against forces beyond mortal comprehension. For a fleeting second, the ship that had been untouchable, unstoppable, seemed locked in place, caught in the Dominion's desperate attempt to chain it to reality. A chance, a window of opportunity. Varric did not hesitate. "All ships, concentrate fire, now." The Dominion fleet unleashed everything. Everything. Thousands of energy beams, railgun rounds, torpedoes, and hypervelocity missiles screamed toward the Vengeance. The void burned with the sheer magnitude of the assault. The stars themselves seemed to flicker as the onslaught reached its peak. No force, no ship, no being in the known universe could withstand such devastation. But then, something happened. The Vengeance, locked within the suppression field, shifted. Not physically, not through propulsion, but as though it had simply decided to no longer be where it was. One instant, it was caught in the gravitational maelstrom. The next, it was free. The field collapsed. The distortion wave rebounded through the Dominion fleet like a shockwave from an imploding star. Smaller ships were ripped apart, their hulls crumpling as the very forces meant to contain the Vengeance backfired. Battleships buckled, their structural integrity failing under the weight of reality snapping back into place. The Dominion fleet was not merely losing, it was breaking. And then, for the first time, the Vengeance responded. Not with words, not with messages, with action. It fired. A single shot, a beam of light, or something beyond light. Something the Dominion's sensors could not define. It did not explode, it did not strike its targets. It simply passed through them, and everything stopped. Varric, Selran, and every Zalari in the fleet watched in horrified silence as ship after ship ceased to function. Not destroyed, not damaged, just gone. Engines flickered out, power, cores dimmed, weapon systems died. The Dominion fleet, once the unshakable force of galactic domination, was left adrift, lifeless, their vessels now nothing more than hollow metal husks floating in the void. Varric felt something cold settle in his chest. The humans had never needed firepower. They had never needed fleets, or numbers, or planetary bombardments, because they had something else. Something the Zalari, for all their conquests, had never encountered. Something that defied logic, defied reason. Something they had never prepared. For Varric understood in that moment why humanity had remained silent for so long. Because if they had ever joined the wars of the galaxy before now, the galaxy would not have survived. Darkness stretched across the void, the remnants of the Dominion fleet drifting in eerie silence. Where once there had been the hum of energy fields, the coordinated movements of an empire's greatest warships, now there was only stillness. A graveyard of vessels suspended in space, powerless, lifeless. The Vengeance remained at the heart of it all, unscathed, untouched, and utterly unreadable. On the bridge of his crippled flagship, Grand Marshal Varric stood frozen, his mind unable to grasp the full scope of what had just transpired. A single shot, a single impossible weapon, no explosion, no impact. And yet the entire fleet had been neutralized as if it had never been a threat to begin with. His hands, once steady as steel, trembled at his sides. This was beyond war, beyond strategy, beyond anything he had ever encountered. Selran, still alive despite the chaos, struggled to bring systems back online. Her fingers flew over the console, rerouting auxiliary power, attempting to re-establish communications, but it was futile. The flagship, one of the most advanced vessels in the Dominion's arsenal, was now adrift, a ghost ship in the wake of something they did not understand. Static filled their comm channels. Every command returned nothing. Even the emergency systems, designed to function in the direst of situations, remained unresponsive. It was as if the ship itself had been stripped of its very essence. The Grand Marshal turned toward his second-in-command, his voice hoarse. "Status?" Selran looked up, her pale features drawn tight with something he had never seen in her before. Dread. "We are offline," she whispered. "Everything is gone. Shields, weapons, engines. Even life support is running on the last vestiges of backup power. We are drifting." Her throat tightened as she forced the next words out. "Marshal, the entire fleet is in the same condition." Varric clenched his jaw, his mind racing. The Dominion had faced defeat before. Every empire did, in some form or another. But this was not defeat in the conventional sense. This was erasure. They had not been bested in combat. They had not been outmaneuvered. They had been rendered irrelevant in the blink of an eye. And the worst part? The Vengeance had done nothing to finish them off. No secondary attack. No demand for surrender. No message of superiority. Just silence. As if humanity did not even consider them worth acknowledging anymore. That realization burned deeper than any wound. Then, for the first time since the engagement, began movement. The Vengeance stirred, its sleek form gliding effortlessly through the battlefield, drifting past the shattered remnants of the Dominion's proud armada like a specter surveying a graveyard. It was leaving. Just like that. No declaration of victory, no further action. It had come, neutralized an empire's might, and now, it simply left. The Dominion fleet, which had once controlled entire sectors of the galaxy with unwavering dominance, had been reduced to an afterthought. A lesson, perhaps. A message far more powerful than any display of brute force. Selron exhaled sharply, trying and failing to suppress the growing fear clawing at her chest. What do we do? The question felt empty. They had no fleet left to command, no way to even move under their own power. The Dominion had never conceived of a situation in which they would be so utterly powerless. But Varric's mind, despite the shock and the chaos, was already pushing past despair. He had spent a lifetime commanding fleets, dictating battles, shaping the course of history. He would not let this be the end. His empire had suffered a wound, a deep, soul-crushing wound. But it was not yet dead. "We survive," he said at last, his voice cold, sharp. "We return to the Dominion. We tell them what we have seen." His gaze darkened. "We tell them that we are not the rulers of the galaxy. We never were." The words felt bitter on his tongue, but they were the truth. A truth that no one had dared consider before today. The Dominion had always viewed itself as the pinnacle of civilization, the supreme power among the stars. But standing before something like this, that belief had been shattered beyond repair. "We must warn them," Selron murmured. "But Marshal, will they even believe us?" Varric's silence was answer enough. How could they? How could anyone believe that an empire's greatest fleet had been dismantled without a single casualty? How could they accept that humanity, a species once dismissed as insignificant, held power that could render their might meaningless? He could already hear the voices of the Dominion's High Council scoffing, dismissing his words as exaggeration, refusing to accept that the foundation of their rule had been undermined in a single battle. No, not a battle. This had not even been a battle. It had been a demonstration, a statement that the rules they had lived by no longer applied, a flicker of light, a pulse of energy. Varric turned sharply as something shifted in the void. The Vengeance, now at the far edge of the wreckage field, seemed to pause. And then, as if answering the unspoken question lingering in the Marshal's mind, a transmission came through. Not in Dominion code, not in any known frequency. But the signal was there, cutting through the static, carving its way directly into the crippled systems of his flagship. The screen before him flickered, and for the first time, the humans spoke. A single line. A simple message. And yet, it carried more weight than any fleet, any weapon, any empire's decree. "You were warned." And just like that, the Vengeance vanished. Not through acceleration, not through warp drive. It simply ceased to be. One moment there, the next, gone. As if the ship had never been real in the first place, just an echo of something beyond their understanding. The Dominion fleet, if it could even be called that anymore, remained adrift, the echoes of those final words lingering long after the humans had disappeared. Varric closed his eyes. We were warned. He did not know what it meant, not fully, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. The Dominion would never be the same again. The void remained unchanged, vast and indifferent. But for the Dominion, nothing would ever be the same. Across the shattered remnants of their once mighty fleet, silence hung like a funeral shroud. The warships that had once struck fear into entire civilizations now floated as powerless hulks, stripped of their might, their purpose, and their very identity. The Vengeance was gone, leaving only the echoes of its impossible actions and the haunting final words that played over and over in Grand Marshal Varric's mind. You were warned. The message had not been a threat. It had not been a boast. It had been a statement of fact, delivered with such certainty that it left no room for denial. Humanity had not merely fought the Dominion. They had demonstrated something far worse, that the rules of war, of power, of dominance in the galaxy had been rewritten, and the Dominion had no say in it. Varric stood on the bridge of his crippled flagship, staring at the shattered fleet around him. Every attempt to regain control had failed. Every system remained unresponsive. His officers had stopped trying. They sat in stunned silence, some whispering to themselves, others staring blankly at darkened consoles. Even Selron, ever the steadfast warrior, had fallen into a near catatonic state, her mind unable to process the sheer scale of what had occurred. It was not just the loss of the battle that weighed on them. It was the implication. If a single human ship could render their entire fleet powerless without a single shot fired in retaliation, then what did that say about the Dominion's place in the galaxy? For centuries, they had believed themselves unchallenged, unshakable. Now that belief lay in ruins, much like the fleet around them. A sudden flicker of power surged through the consoles, and for a brief, fleeting moment, hope sparked in Varric's chest. But it was not a return of control. It was something else. The main screen, dead since the moment the Vengeance fired its single silent shot, flickered back to life. Lines of code scrolled across it in an unknown language, shifting and reforming before his very eyes, rewriting themselves in Dominion script. Data flooded in, overwhelming the ship's remaining processors, forcing their dying systems to focus on one thing only: the message being transmitted. No, not a message. A lesson. The screen stabilized, and Varric found himself staring at something that should not exist. It was a map, but not of any Dominion-controlled territory. It was a star chart so vast, so incomprehensibly large, that even their most advanced archives contained only fragments of what he now saw. Entire sectors of the galaxy they had never explored. Systems they had dismissed as barren. But among the countless stars and distant clusters, one thing stood out: regions that had been marked, territories that bore a single insignia, a single symbol stamped in cold, calculated precision. It was not the Dominion's crest. It was not the mark of any empire they had ever encountered. It was something new. And yet something told him it had always been there, hidden just beyond their sight. Humanity's domain. Varric's breath caught in his throat. He had assumed, as all Dominion leaders had, that humanity was a young species, that they had only recently emerged into the greater galactic stage, that their power, while formidable, was new, something that could be countered, studied, eventually overcome. But the map before him told a different story. It was ancient. It bore timestamps that predated the Dominion's rise by millennia. Humanity had not just appeared. They had been watching, waiting, growing, expanding in ways no empire had ever noticed. And worse, they had chosen to remain unseen. The Dominion had always prided itself on its intelligence networks, its ability to uncover hidden threats before they became a danger. But humanity had evaded them. Not just evaded, manipulated. Every recorded encounter, every piece of data the Dominion had ever gathered on them, it was all wrong. A carefully constructed facade, a deliberate deception. Humanity had let the galaxy believe they were small, that they were vulnerable, that they were just another species clawing for survival. And the Dominion, in its arrogance, had fallen for it. Selron's voice was barely a whisper. This is impossible. But the evidence was undeniable. The map was real. The star systems, the territories, all of it. The realization hit Varric like a physical blow. The Dominion had never ruled the galaxy. It had never even been close. They had been permitted to believe in their supremacy, allowed to play their game of conquest in the places where humanity did not care to intervene. But the moment they overstepped, the moment they became a problem, the illusion had been shattered. Another flicker of energy, another pulse of data. The map zoomed in, focusing on a single world, Earth, the cradle of humanity, the place where it all began. But unlike every other Dominion archive that depicted it as an isolated, underdeveloped planet, this image showed something far different. A fortress, planetary defenses beyond comprehension, shipyards that stretched across entire orbital rings, structures that defied physics as the Dominion understood them. This was no backwater world. This was the heart of an empire that had chosen secrecy over conquest, that had hidden its strength until the moment it deemed necessary to reveal it. And today, with a single ship, with a single demonstration, that moment had arrived. The screen flickered one last time. The map faded. The data vanished. And then, the final message appeared. Simple. Direct. Unmistakable. Do not return. And just like that, the screen went dark. The power surge dissipated. The Dominion fleet remained dead in the water, drifting in the void. Varric let out a slow breath. There was no question anymore. No illusions. The Dominion had not merely lost a battle today. It had been redefined. Humanity had spoken, not in words, not in threats, but in undeniable action. They had shown that they had always been there, in the shadows, shaping the galaxy in ways no one had ever realized. And now, they had made their stance clear. The Dominion was no longer the dominant force in the galaxy. It never had been. The shattered remnants of the Dominion fleet drifted through the void, their once proud warships reduced to lifeless husks. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint, hollow echoes of malfunctioning systems struggling against their inevitable collapse. Grand Marshal Varric stood on the bridge of his crippled flagship, staring at the vast nothingness ahead. He had been in countless battles. He had seen worlds burn, civilizations kneel, and enemies crumble before the might of the Dominion. But this was something else entirely. He was not merely witnessing the aftermath of a defeat. He was staring into the abyss of a truth so profound, so utterly shattering, that it threatened to unravel everything he had ever believed. The weight of it pressed against his chest, making each breath feel like a laborious effort. Humanity had allowed the Dominion to exist. That fact alone was more terrifying than any weapon, any strategy, any fleet they could have encountered. Varric clenched his fists, his mind racing through the implications. The sheer arrogance they had displayed. The Dominion had believed itself the pinnacle of galactic power, the unchallenged force of order and conquest. But now he saw the truth. They had never been the rulers of the galaxy. They had been the children playing at war, unaware of the Titans watching from the dark, and the Titans had finally decided to make themselves known. A new transmission crackled through the dead silence. No screens activated, no visuals, just a voice, calm, cold, and inescapable. It was human. You will leave. You will not return. This is not a warning. It is law. Varric felt the words settle over him like a weight that could never be lifted. The sheer finality in that voice sent a chill through his core. It was not a threat. It was not a demand. It was a statement of reality. And worse than that, it was dismissal. The Dominion was no longer considered a threat, no longer an entity worth the effort of extermination. They were being discarded, like an irrelevance no longer worth acknowledging. Selron, still barely able to speak, managed to whisper, "What do we do?" Varric closed his eyes. He knew what they wanted to do. To fight, to retaliate, to avenge the humiliation that had been inflicted upon them. But he also knew what that would mean. There was no victory here, no battle to be won. The war was over before it had even begun. Humanity had shown them only a glimpse of their power. A single ship had rendered their might meaningless. What would happen if they sent an armada? If they truly decided to erase the Dominion from existence? The answer was simple. They would. And it would take them less effort than breathing. "Set course for home," Varric finally said, his voice devoid of its usual authority. "We leave. Now." The bridge crew hesitated, but only for a moment. They understood. They had seen the truth just as clearly as he had. Without another word, they moved to execute the order. What few operational systems remained in their fleet flickered back to life, engines humming weakly as they prepared for the long, shameful journey back to Dominion space. No fleet had ever returned in disgrace like this. No force had ever been so completely and irrevocably undone. As the stars began to shift around them, as the human-claimed territories faded from view, Varric felt a single lingering thought take root in his mind. It was not anger. It was not even fear. It was dread. Because now, for the first time in his life, he understood something truly terrifying. The galaxy had never belonged to the Dominion. It had never belonged to the great empires that rose and fell, claiming dominance over the stars. It had always belonged to the Silent Watchers, and the Watchers had decided to speak.